Alexander is a practicing GP based in Melbourne. She specialises in preventative health, general medicine, mental health, paediatrics, women's medicine, and sexual health. As both a doctor and a mum of two, Preeya's passionate about sharing accurate information, empowering people to make informed decisions about their health. Preeya uses her social media platform and blog to combat health misinformation and deconstruct complex medical topics to make them more digestible. She's built a loyal and engaged following and is the co-host of the popular cooking show, Good Chef, Bad Chef. Dr. Preeya has been featured as an expert on Channel 7's Sunrise, hosted 2 Catalyst episodes on the ABC, and continues to appear regularly on The Drum. Preeya's book, Eat, Sleep, Play, Love, being released early May, is the ultimate survival guide to overcoming the challenges of the first 2 years of parenting. Welcome to Pure Health Hub, Preeya.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, it's a treat. It's a treat to have you. All right. Now, we've got a lot in common here in a sense that I certainly don't have a medical degree, but here at the Hub, we're all about preventative health. So using natural therapies and quality living with a little medicine if and when necessary. The key to understanding, though, when to use what and how, especially with our kids. So today I want to have a quick chat about our kids' health. Now that is a bit like a long piece of string, so we'll keep that brief for now. But then I want to step in for our audience, who I asked to share some of their challenges. So I'm going to pose those to you after that.
Wonderful.
All right, so let's start with their health. And this seems to be the key questions that always come up, even 27 years ago when I had a little one. They're always coming down with something, especially if they're going to daycare. But, how can we tell when a rash, cold, poo, moan, cry, or whimper are not normal?
Very, very good question. I say to parents all the time in the consulting room that you do know your child best. So that gut instinct, I say to parents, listen to it, because if you know your child is just not themselves, you know your child. And so I say to parents, what exactly are you worried about? Is your child more flat than normal? Is there something you're noticing that, because I don't know them as well as you do. So number 1 would be to trust your gut. Number 2 is to always have a really low threshold to check in with a qualified health professional like your GP. So if you don't know, you're umming and ahhing, you're sitting at home, don't sit at home, go and get it reviewed so we can examine your child and go through all the red flags and make sure there's nothing nasty going on. But number 3 is that with any kind of viral illness, and I need to say to parents that, preschoolers get 6 to 12 viral infections a year. That's normal. That's a bloody lot of viral infections, but that's what's considered normal. Yeah. And so I say to parents, look, as time goes on and kids build their immunity, you get a bit of a feel of what's normal and what's not. But key things like, is your child hydrated? Are they doing enough poos and wheeze? Are they flat? Are they still communicating despite having a sniffle? These are the key things we really look at. And with time, you get better at identifying what's normal and what isn't. But 6 to 12 is the norm, and it's a bloody lot. As a parent who's living it at the moment, it's a lot.
It's a phenomenal amount, isn't it, really? It's, and I think it is, it's about being confident and building that confidence, right, with your child and getting to know them.
Yep.
And really knowing them, because then we end up with everybody talking about, and looking at everybody else's opinions. Take that gut instinct, as you say,
correct,
and run with it, really.
And I say to parents, I'm seeing a lot of sick kids currently, but I say to parents, the really key nuts and bolts here are, is your kid well hydrated? Are they still communicating with you? A flat child who's not drinking fluid and has a dry nappy, that's a real red flag. So hydration is actually a really important part of it all. It's the really simple stuff, really.
Yeah, it's not as tricky, but we do tend to overthink it.
We do, and I do too. As a parent, my kids are sick, honestly, Lindy. When my kids are sick, the minute they have a cough, I'm like, it's probably tuberculosis. And my husband, is a surgeon, is like, couldn't it just be a viral illness? I'm like, it's probably TB, probably.
Yeah. And then once we talk ourselves down, we can look at it logically.
The clarity comes, correct.
Yeah, that's right. I think, that's it. Just look at that, have your little meltdown, and then
Correct.
And calm it down. All right, then the other thing that seems to pop up a lot is diet, and particularly starting them on solids. You know, there was always the talk about allergies and not introducing things till much later to avoid allergies. You know, what's the allergy angle, and also what are other tips when it comes to introducing foods?
Well, this is a huge part of the book. So in this, I have 2 chapters dedicated to solids. So the medical aspects to starting solids, and then how to nurture a good relationship with food and their bodies. So when it comes to starting solids, things have really evolved in this space. Okay. When it comes to the key tidbits you need to know is that, you know, there's a slight differing in the guidelines here. The WHO, the World Health Organization, say exclusively breastfeed until 6 months and then start solids. That's not always possible for people. People correctly know that, you know. And other guidelines like the ASCIA guidelines, which is the Australasian Society of Clinical Immunology and Allergy, big name. So let's go with ASCIA. But they talk about starting solids around 6 months and not before 4, when the infant is ready. So not before 4 months because the gut's just not ready. But really, Lindy, the key is to knowing when your child is ready, and it's going to be around 6 months. Every child is different, and you're looking for signs of readiness. Is your child ready? Are they interested in food? Are they holding their head up spontaneously? Are they trying to pull things off your plate? You're looking for signs of readiness, and that's when you would start solids. And there's so much more to this, but that's kind of the when. The other thing is, you're right, things have shifted in terms of reducing the risk of food allergies. So back in the day, we used to think, oh, hold off on peanut and egg. You don't want them to develop a food allergy. Now we know actually the opposite is true. And the guidelines say introduce these common allergy-causing foods before the age of 1, keep them in the diet to reduce the risk of food allergies. So I'm talking about peanut protein, tree nuts, sesame, soy, fish, shellfish, cow's milk. There's a few of them, but really we want to get them in the diet. And if there's no reaction, there's no hives, there's no rash, there's nothing, you want to keep them in the diet consistently. So food allergies on the rise, you actually have some control here as parents and caregivers.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems more logical to me that you would introduce things, because it does. And I think it did certainly when he was young, when my boy was young as well. Now, okay, some great tips there. But as you say, you know, you can go into more in depth. You can go more in depth in that in the book, of course.
Yeah.
Now, I put this out to our audience, and I said, I was chatting to you, and they said, oh, great. And I said, well, look, I just want those questions just to hit me up. So, of course, I was inundated. So I've chosen, I'm hopefully going to get you back, but I've chosen some of the ones that seemed like I had a common denominator. Okay. So let's start with those. So something I hadn't even heard of. How do you get through sleep regressions?
So sleep is a huge part of my book. So I actually have lots of experts in the book, other expert voices. And for the sleep chapter, I've got Dr. Liz Marr, who's a GP expert in sleep and settling. Actually, we in the medical community don't use the term sleep regressions. So it's not actually something in my textbooks. It's not something I heard in lectures. We don't actually use the term. And what I love is Dr. Liz in the book mentions, she calls them developmental surges as opposed to regressions. She uses this positive language. Because what we know, Lindy, is that sleep regressions, if let's call them that, or progressions or surges, these blips in sleep usually occur when a baby is developmentally progressing, when they're learning a new skill like sitting independently or crawling. And so studies have actually shown, there's a study from 2016 which has looked at 8-month-olds who are learning to stand, pull to stand. And in that study, they found these 8-month-olds, actually most of them had some form of sleep disturbance. So when it's happening, and it does happen, the biggest one is usually around 4 months, but they happen and they are absolute killers. And I'm not saying they're not hard, that you're not exhausted, that you're not screaming at 3 o'clock in the morning going, why is this happening? But it can be reassuring to know that A, it's normal, and B, that actually your baby is developmentally progressing. It can be a really nice psychological thing to know that. Yeah. The key to managing them though is consistency. It's to stick with good sleep routines. If you're a patter, if you were using white noise, if you were doing graduated crying, if you were doing camping out, go back to your consistent sleep routines and be consistent. Right. Don't start doing stuff that you wouldn't normally do in those patches. If you're normally rocking, go for it. But if you're not normally a rocker, try to go with your normal, whatever you're doing.
Right.
And know it's finite, and get help if you need it is the other thing.
Yeah. It almost sounds like the modern day growing pains. Right?
Yes, it is. And I think we talk about sleep more now because we know for parents and caregivers, sleep deprivation has significant health impacts, mental health, we know blood pressure, heart disease risk. So people are talking more about sleep. They want sleep. So I would say if you're struggling and you're not getting through the developmental surge and the sleep blip easily, get help. Speak to someone. Because they could be sick. They might have a urinary tract infection or an ear infection. So get them checked.
Yeah, right. So once you go through all of that, but a really interesting point about don't change anything, because I think that was the thing. You go, oh, well, this is not working anymore, so I'll try something else. Yeah.
Correct.
Right point. All right. Now, the age-old teething. So what are top tips for teething?
Teething, this is another thing I talk about in the book, because what I do in the book is basically, Lindy, break down lots of myths, studies, and put it in a really digestible form. But there are so many myths around teething, okay? So the first thing is there's a lot of studies that have looked at parents bringing their children into hospital. They've attributed illness, fever to teething. And in these studies, they've found that most of these kids actually had something else going on, like a middle ear infection or a urinary tract infection. And the parents had said that it was teething. Wow. So my first tip would be not to blame fevers on teething. That's the biggest myth. Teething will not cause a fever.
Okay. So
a fever is something over 38 degrees Celsius, and teething, the studies tell us, don't cause that. Okay, it's usually going to be something else like a viral infection. The other one is that teething causes diarrhea. That's another myth. And so the American Academy of Pediatrics have basically said there's no evidence to support that. So my first tip is don't please blame everything on teething. And if you're worried about something, a fever or sleep changes or whatever, and you're blaming teething, get it checked, because it could be something else.
Yeah.
The other thing is there are lots of things that you can do for supportive care. So basically massaging the gum with please wash your finger. Don't put a dirty finger in their mouth because they'll end up with more diarrhea. Massaging the gum, using these kind of teething rings that are cooled but not frozen, because the frozen ones aren't safe. You want to be really careful of teething gels. They're quite heavily marketed, but they often have these ingredients in them which can be harmful. But all this supportive care can be quite helpful, but teething is normal. And for a lot of kids, it doesn't cause many problems. That's the truth.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think we are potentially just blaming other things on teething when it really, okay.
I say, I often use this analogy to patients. I say, if I come home exhausted from work, and, I'm putting the kids to bed and the dishwasher's on, and I blame the bloody dishwasher for being exhausted. It's happening in the background anyway. It's because I'm trying to be a hero. That's why I'm exhausted. Yeah. But that's teething. That's teething, Kids are going through developmental surges. They're having, they're learning lots. They're getting diarrhea because they're putting everything in their mouth and, exploring the world through their mouths. They're exposed to germs. It's not the teeth. That's just the dishwasher in the background. It's everything else. Yeah.
And as you say, there's a virus at least once a month.
Correct.
So, it could be anything.
Could be anything.
Which I think is why we overthink it, right? All
right.
The other gem, of course, is tantrums. How do we overcome? How do we deal with them?
Well, again, and I know this is really annoying when doctors keep saying this, but it's actually really normal. Tantrums are normal. And I say this as the mother of a current 3-year-old. Between 18 to 30 months, kids are going to have tantrums. When I come home, again, exhausted, my dinner falls off the plate after a crap day at work, I do want to smash the plate and get on the floor and scream. But we have that emotional regulation over years, and 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds just don't have that yet. So it's normal. The key things I say to parents, because I see a lot in this space, is what can we do to prevent the tantrums? So often parents, I get them to keep a bit of a diary and we look for clues. So are the tantrums consistently, perhaps after being overstimulated, after lots of screen time? Is it before a meal? Do we have too much of a gap between a snack and a meal? Is it before bedtime? Does the toddler need more control around bedtime to feel like they've got some autonomy? I try and prevent them. So I talk to parents about what can we do here to stop us from even getting there. Of course, if you get there, you need tactics to deal with it. And that depends on your kid. For some, it's going to be ignoring. For some, it's going to be getting down to their level and gentle touch, not restraining them ever, but gentle touch. For some, it's going to be distraction. Oh my gosh, is that a bunny out there? You know, whatever it is, you've got to find what works for your child. But the prevention aspect of things, I think, you know, I can't talk about it enough. So I know with my son, if he is hungry, it's usually going to result in a meltdown. And so before we even get there, I go, darling, do you think you need to put something in your tummy? You know, you've got to read the cues and you become an expert with time, but prevention is key with tantrums.
So it is just really getting to know them. And I think that's, you know, putting that into perspective in terms of what's going on around you. And I think even from memory, for me, it was often when I was feeling really highly strung or, you know, and I think looking at all of those things, it's knowing your child and try to, learn more about how they're going. And of course, you can't overcome them. You just need to work through them, right?
You need to work through them. But I think if you really sit down with a detective hat as a parent and go, you know, my child is having this tantrum every time I say it's bath time. You know, if you really put your detective on, what can you do to change the dynamic around bath time? Do we move to a shower? Do we introduce a new sponge to play with? Do we let them, you know, help fill the bath? Choose their pajamas, you know, make it a game. But you've just got to find a way to negotiate those times to have less meltdowns, because it's usually change, overstimulation, all those things for toddlers. And it's hard. They're learning so much.
Yeah. And you're right. They don't have that regulation yet. You know, that's the other thing, that emotional regulation. All right. Here's one that's a little bit out of the box, but nonetheless equally difficult sometimes. Overbearing grandparents or, you know, family members who won't abide by the rules that you've set for your children. How do you deal with that? I mean, I don't know, how do you deal with that?
It's tricky, right? This is tricky stuff. You're dealing with other humans, mate. It's never easy. I have to say, you know, I'm quite lucky in that my mother is a very big caregiver for both of our children. And she's a very intelligent woman who's a QC, so has her own very fixed thoughts. And with time, I've had to explain to Mum, the reason that I need you to chop the cherry tomatoes into quarters is because it kills children if they eat a whole one. I've seen children choke and die. And Mum goes, wow, okay, I didn't realise. I think when you're talking to grandparents and they've got their fixed beliefs, you need to explain to them why, you know, certain things are really important, not just put them to back on, you know, you've got to put them on their back to sleep and then walk away and they've got them on the front again. But we used to do this. This is what we did.
Exactly.
You know, actually saying the reason I need you to put them on their back is because kids can be more likely to die if you do it your way. Really
get the attention.
Yeah, but give them the reason. And you also need to pick, Lindy, what's important and what's not.
Yeah.
So
battles, right?
Correct. And it's like that with a 3-year-old. Like, what are the deal breakers here? Because you can't go on everything. So I know what my deal breakers are, and my mum will do stuff with the kids, and she's a grandparent and she's allowed to. She never did it with me, but she's allowed to. And Will and I, my husband, go, you know what, it doesn't matter. That's okay, but this stuff is important to us. We'll pick those battles and we'll let them know.
Yeah, it's so true. My view was as if she's going to, I mean, you should be so lucky to have grandparents, you know, to support you. But you're right. I just, when he was with her, I just go, look, your rules, you know, but she wasn't doing this day to day. But I think the day to day stuff, you're right. Just pick your battles, and she's really important. Yeah, good feedback. All right. So what about then? You've got mum and dad, or whoever, mum or whatever, you've got different parenting styles. So, and you of course don't come into this when you get married and then you know, all fabulous, and then you have children, you go, oh my God, I didn't know you were going to do this. How do we deal with that? How do we work through that?
So there's actually evidence, I know I'm a major nerd, but there is evidence that there are different parenting styles. Okay, so there's this report from 2011 from an Australian, it's called ARACY, ARACY, if anyone wants to look into it. But it talks about parenting styles. And I think it's so interesting because I think nearly 99% of my patients fit somewhere on this spectrum they describe. But they talk about one end of the spectrum being intuitive parents who kind of happy to go with the flow, take their cues from the child. Then on the other side, there's this kind of infant behaviour management parents who are kind of, we're going to adopt strategies to help our child learn to sleep. And people sit somewhere on the spectrum, Lindy, and I'm probably more towards the behaviour management side. Yeah. Now, what we need to accept is that all of us are probably somewhere different on the spectrum. So if you're in a relationship and you're raising a child, it's important to kind of go, where are we both on this spectrum? Even draw the line and mark where you think you are. Yeah. And then it's similar to grandparents. You got to pick your battles. Yeah. So what things are you both willing to compromise on and what things aren't you? Because what I see is that differences in parenting style in the consulting room can cause a lot of tension in the home. And so I say to people, we need to get on the same page with the important stuff, which is sleep, often, because one person's keen to do some behavioural sleep interventions and one might not be, but the whole household is imploding because everyone's exhausted. So I talk about, what's important, what's a deal breaker, what's not, where can you compromise and where could you, and let's try and meet somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Well, I think that gives it a good sort of benchmark too, and that you can at least kind of research or look at where you are. Yeah. And then, like I guess anything when it comes to relationships, right? Yeah, they've got to negotiate your way through.
You've got to negotiate. It's not easy, mate. It's not easy.
No. Life is one big negotiation.
It is, correct.
Oh dear. All right. Then let's just talk a little bit about support. Right. In the olden days, even before my time, women, it was very much about the village and the grandparents were close by, family was close by, and they could, there was a lot of support around, a lot of talk sort of, to help us raise our kids. We're a lot more alone these days. Is there any tools, or have you got any practical advice or, tools that you might be able to share for those who are feeling quite alone?
Look, I think we're talking more about loneliness. We know that there are actually lots of health implications, both mental and physical, health implications to loneliness. I have to say, I think parenthood, particularly motherhood, when you're a new mum and you're at home, and often you're alone because maybe there's someone else, another caregiver who's out there kind of, not on maternity or paternity leave. Yeah. So I found it quite an isolating time, and I had people around me, but still I kind of went, whoa, this is not what I had envisioned. I'm bleeding and my nipples are sore and I'm exhausted and I have to take this thing and 15 bags with me to go to the shop and to get a coffee. And you're kind of reeling. For many of us, I think the transition is quite challenging, painful. And then you're also quite socially isolated because you can't do the stuff you used to. And you can't catch up with people on a whim. And so, yes, it can be quite isolating for people. My kind of tips here are most people in Australia have the option of attending a parents group, be it online or in person. And I know that at 6 weeks, it can feel daunting when you get this email and you go, what? What if my baby cries? What if I have to feed them? What if I have to bring a bottle out and I'm judged? All this crap you have to deal with, right? But I would say go. I would say go because you're going to be around humans who are living the same crap show as what you are. I didn't swear just in case. But try and connect with people and find your people. And then I would also say seek help and accept it. If people are offering to help you, can I drop something round? Could I come over and, take the baby for an hour so you can wash your hair or go for a walk? Don't feel guilty. Don't be a hero. Say yes. Just say yes and stay connected to the world. So I prescribe my patients at the 6-week check, leaving the house once a day if they're up for it, to go and get milk, to go and get a coffee, just something for the brain to connect to other humans. Yeah. Really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember the isolation at the time as well, and felt very, very isolated. So I agree. So it really is, we need to make that effort. Like with anything now, you move towns, you've got to find your tribe, and particularly when something fundamental like having children is there. So great tips. That's wonderful. Thank you. Now, that sort of brings us to a close there, but I want to talk a bit about the Eat, Sleep, Play, Love. They used to talk about babies not coming with an instruction manual. So is this book of yours, if you could hold it up for me, Is this the new instruction manual?
I reckon it is.
Yeah.
I reckon it
might
is. This is
be.
kind of, it's very practical, lots of lists and doodles. This is basically the guide you need for the first 2 years, all the medical tidbits. This is different though, Lindy, because I don't give people answers. I'm not saying this is the single right way to do it. This is the best way. I give you the options, the pros, the cons, the evidence, and you make an informed decision because there's no bloody right answer.
No, right, because we're human, right? And they're human.
Correct.
And, there are so many variables to that. And I think, with the 2 kids on your own, I think and I haven't read this for obvious reasons. One, I haven't had well, it's not been launched, but also because I'm not in the trenches. But I will say I've watched some of your reels and they're very funny, but what's so fabulous about them is, of course, you include the children without them being included, which is adorable, but everything about them is perfectly imperfect. And I think this is really something, and it's certainly something that I want to drive home with our audience, is life is perfectly imperfect and everything that we do should be too. So try not to take ourselves too seriously, right?
Correct. And just know that if you're going, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Am I doing it right? With everything, that actually 99% of the population are thinking the same thing. You're not alone, and we're all bumbling along and freaking out, and it's completely fine.
Yeah. So I think having at least a guidebook that something's going on and you can go, okay, this might not be an answer because your child is its own being, but at least it'll give you some things to tick off anyway. Right. Congratulations on the book. I'm sure it will be a smash hit when it comes out in early May. Thanks for chatting to us, Preeya. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lindy.